So let's begin by looking at the different heat transfer mechanisms that we know. So first, let's start by the definition. Heat transfer is a process. It's a process by which thermal energy is transported from a region of high temperature to a region of lower temperature due to that temperature difference. And when we're talking about heat transfer, there's mainly three mechanisms. You can have conduction, you can have convection, and you can have radiation. Conduction is when there's a transfer of energy between stationary or adjacent molecules. So you could see the hand holding the pot. So the person holding the pot will eventually get to feel that the pot is very hot. And if it's very, very hot, they might just leave the pot very quickly because then they're going to burn themselves. Now, they received that energy into their hands through conduction from holding the pot. However, convection is the opposite. Convection is associated with movement of fluids. So in this picture, you have liquid that's inside the pot. And as you can see, the bottom surface of the pot is being heated and is getting very hot because of the hot fire. And what's happening is the liquid, as it's mixing through the pot, due to the buoyancy effect and the density gradient, there's more mixing that's happening in the pot. But the point being is, as the liquid travels over the surface, it's gaining heat. And so that is what convection is: movement of fluid over a surface with a different temperature. And so that provides heat exchange from that surface to that fluid. The last mechanism is radiation, and radiation is associated with the emission of electromagnetic rays. So this is completely different from conduction and convection. This happens because all objects emit some form of electromagnetic radiation, and that electromagnetic radiation has some heat associated with that. And we're going to dive into the details about different objects with different surfaces, because not all objects are capable of receiving that energy. Some of them reflect it. And so we're going to dive deeper into that when we talk about radiation. But for now, what's important for you to know is that there are three mechanisms of heat transfer. So now, a summary of the modes of heat transfer that I just talked about. You have conduction, which is heat transfer through a solid or a stationary fluid. As you can see in the picture over here, you have a wall, and you have one end of a wall at temperature, let's say T1, and let's say temperature at T1 is higher than the other end of the wall, which is temperature at T2. So since T1 is higher than T2, you have a heat flux or heat flow that is going across the wall from the high temperature to the low temperature. And as you can see, this is an example of somebody that's holding a rod, and the tip of the rod is touching a fire, and eventually the rod is getting warmer and warmer along its length, and the person holding the rod will eventually feel the heat. And that is due to conduction, heat transfer that is traveling through conduction across the rod. The second one that we talked about is convection, which is heat transfer from a surface to a moving fluid. And so you could see here, these are arrows indicating that there's fluid moving over, let's say, a surface, let's say if it's inside a pipe. And if you have the temperature of the surface being higher than the temperature of the fluid, then obviously you're going to have heat that's being transferred from the surface absorbed by the fluid into the fluid. And so that is convection. Another example of that is, let's say you have a fan, and that fan is blowing onto a hot surface. And so let's say you're trying to cool something that's very hot, and so you put a fan in front of it. What's happening is the fan is pushing air, so it's moving the fluid onto the surface that's hot, and as the fluid is moving onto that surface, as a result, the surface is getting cooler. And finally, we talked about radiation, and this exists because two surfaces would emit radiation to each other. And this is an example. You have, let's say, a mirror and you have a lamp, and both of them would be emitting radiation to each other. So let's start with the first mode of heat transfer, and we'll talk about that in the next video. So without further ado, see you in the next video.